Transfer $30,000 right now, Letitia. Or we call the police and tell them you've been embezzling company funds. My father didn't say hello. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just screamed the ultimatum through the phone. Your brother is being held by the cartel. He owes them 30 grand. If you don't wire it in 10 minutes, he's dead. And if you refuse, we'll ruin you. We have the emails ready to send to your board. I didn't panic. I didn't beg. I just felt a cold clarity wash over me. Call the police, I said. I dare you. Then I hung up and turned off my phone. Before I tell you what they did next, and how I made them regret every single word, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single one. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind you only find in a sterile, high-rise apartment at 2 a.m. I didn't go back to sleep. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the frozen Chicago skyline. My reflection staring back Letitia Hayes, 32 years old, chief operating officer of a logistics firm that moved billions in assets daily. I built my life on risk assessment and damage control. I solved impossible problems for a living. But as I stared at the city lights, I realized the biggest liability in my life wasn't a market crash. It was my own bloodline. I opened my laptop. The blue light washed over my kitchen island. I didn't log into my bank account to transfer the 30,000. Instead, I opened a file I'd kept hidden for a decade. Ledger. It was a detailed accounting of every cent I had ever given them. I scrolled past the 20,000 for Caleb's first tech startup that turned out to be a sports betting addiction. I scrolled past the 15,000 for Madison's influencer launch party that ended with 0 followers and a trashed Airbnb. I looked at the bottom line. $250,000. That wasn't support. That was a ransom paid in installments. For years, people asked me why I did it. Why a woman who could negotiate with union leaders and hostile boards would fold the moment her mother cried on the phone. They didn't understand the training. It wasn't generosity. It was the trap of normalized cruelty. My parents didn't just wake up one day and decide to use me. They spent 3 decades grooming me to believe that my only value was my utility. I remembered being 12 years old, standing in the kitchen in our old house, holding a report card with straight A's. I waited for my mother to turn around from the sink. I waited for a good job, a smile, anything. She didn't even look at me. She just pointed to the bucket and the rag in the corner and said, "The floor isn't going to scrub itself, Letitia. Stop looking for applause for doing what you're supposed to do." That was the lesson. Achievement was the baseline. Love was a wage. And the price of admission was labor. If I wasn't providing, I wasn't existing. I paid their bills not because I was kind, but because I was terrified that without the checks, I would disappear completely. But tonight, the transaction had changed. They weren't asking for a fee for their affection anymore. They were threatening my survival. Caleb wasn't just a screw-up. He was a thief who had stolen my identity to fund a lifestyle I worked 80-hour weeks to maintain. And my parents weren't protectors. They were accomplices holding a gun to my career. I looked at the spreadsheet one last time. I thought about them in Cabo, warm and reckless, drinking on credit cards that bore my name, while I stood in a freezing apartment, auditing my own exploitation. The guilt that usually choked me was gone. In its place was the cold, hard resolve of a COO deciding to liquidate a failing asset. I closed the spreadsheet. It was time to audit the fraud. 10 minutes later, the silence of my apartment shattered again. My phone vibrated against the marble countertop. A harsh, mechanical buzzing that sounded like a warning. It was my mother this time. I stared at the screen. A normal daughter might have felt a pang of worry. A normal daughter might have thought, maybe she's calling to apologize. Maybe she's calling to tell Dad to stop. I didn't think any of those things. I knew exactly what this was. This was the second wave. I swiped answer and put it on speaker. I didn't say a word. I just let the open line hang in the cold air between Chicago and Cabo. "You think you can just hang up on us?" My mother's voice wasn't shrill. It was terrifyingly calm. The voice she used when she was explaining to a teacher why it was actually the school's fault Caleb hadn't turned in his homework for a month. "We didn't want to do this, Letitia. We wanted to keep this in the family. But you're forcing our hand." "Do what, Mom?" I asked, leaning against the counter, crossing my arms. "Call the police?" "Go ahead. I'll send them my bank statements." "Not the police," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, a sharp, jagged thing. "The board. We know you have access to the operational accounts, Letitia. We know you move millions of dollars a day. If you don't transfer $30,000 to the family trust account in the next 15 minutes, we're going to forward a folder of emails to your CEO. Emails that look very much like you've been funneling money into offshore shell companies for years." I froze. They didn't have real emails, of course. I was the most compliant, by-the-book officer in my company's history. But in my world, The accusation was enough to trigger an internal investigation. An investigation meant suspension. Suspension meant a freeze on my clearance, my reputation, and my stock options. They weren't just threatening to embarrass me. They were threatening to nuclear bomb the career I had sacrificed my 20s to build. You forged emails? I asked, my voice flat. Caleb is very good with computers. My father chimed in from the background. He created quite a paper trail. It looks authentic. Metadata. Timestamps. Everything. It would take a forensic team weeks to clear your name. By then, you'll be fired. And your stock will be worthless. Is 30 grand really worth losing everything you have? I looked at the phone as if it were a venomous snake coiled on my counter. This wasn't desperation. This was premeditated. They had this ready. They had been sitting on this insurance policy for who knows how long, waiting for the moment I finally said no. They didn't see me as their daughter. They saw me as a resource to be harvested. And now that I was refusing to yield, they were preparing to burn the field. Why are you doing this? I asked, not because I was sad, but because I needed to understand the mechanics of their betrayal. Because we are a family, my mother snapped, her voice cracking with that twisted, weaponized victimhood I knew so well. And family saves each other. Caleb is in trouble. Real trouble. You have the money sitting there. You're just being selfish. Transfer the money to the family trust. Now. Or we hit send. The family trust. That was the account I put $5,000 into every month, the account my father controlled, the safety net they claimed was for everyone's future. It was the only account they could access quickly. Okay, I said. The word tasted like ash. I need a minute to get my token. I didn't move toward my purse. I didn't reach for my security fob. I stared at the phone, and for the first time that night, the last vestige of the little girl who just wanted to please her parents died. They wanted a war. They wanted to leverage my career, my integrity, and my life against their son's gambling debt. They thought they had me cornered. They thought the threat of professional ruin would make me fold, but they forgot one critical detail about my job. I didn't just manage assets. I hunted liabilities. And right now, the biggest liability in the room was on the other end of that phone line. I set the phone down on the counter, leaving the line open. I could hear them breathing on the other end. Waiting. Probably smirking at each other in that humid Cabo hotel room, thinking they had finally broken the bank. They thought I was scrambling to find my routing number. They thought I was liquidating assets to save their golden boy. They were wrong. I wasn't logging into the transfer portal. I was logging into the Global Risk Monitor, a proprietary system my firm used to vet international partners. I typed my social security number into the search bar. I didn't have to wait for a loading screen. The truth flashed up in bright, undeniable red text. Alert. New line of credit opened. Location. Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. Limit. $50,000. Current balance. $30,412. There was no cartel. There was no kidnapping. There was just a platinum credit card issued in my name 3 days ago. The authorized user? Caleb Hayes. I stared at the screen, and the last shred of my childhood delusion evaporated. Caleb hadn't borrowed money from dangerous men. He had stolen my identity. He had forged my signature, used my credentials, and gone on a bender. And my parents? They weren't terrified for his life. They were terrified of me. They knew that the moment I saw that charge, it wouldn't be a family matter anymore. It would be federal wire fraud. They weren't trying to save him from a drug lord. They were trying to force me to cover the debt before I realized it was a crime scene. They wanted me to ratify the fraud with my own money, making me an accessory to my own robbery. Letitia? My mother's voice crackled from the speakerphone, impatient now. Do you have the token? We're running out of time. Almost there, I said. My voice was so calm it frightened me. Just verifying the routing number. I picked up my work cell, the encrypted one. I didn't dial 911. I dialed the direct line to the global fraud unit of my bank. I didn't have to listen to hold music. When you move the kind of capital I move, you get a human being on the first ring. This is Letitia Hayes, I said. My eyes locked on the speakerphone where my parents were whispering to each other. Verification code. Alpha 9 Victor. I am reporting active identity theft and international credit fraud occurring right now in Mexico. Go ahead, Miss Hayes, the agent said. We're listening. The card ending in 4092 was opened fraudulently, I said, typing as I spoke. The user is currently attempting to process a transaction. I need a full freeze on all assets associated with my social security number. Flag the user as hostile, and notify the local authorities in Cabo San Lucas that an American citizen is attempting to use stolen financial instruments. Freezing accounts now, the agent replied. Notification sent to Mexican law enforcement. The card will decline on the next attempt. I hung up the work phone. I looked back at the laptop. The status on the screen changed from active to locked. Fraud alert. I walked back to the kitchen counter and picked up my personal phone. My mother was saying something about how grateful Caleb would be. How this would bring us all closer together. I almost laughed. She had no idea. She thought she was negotiating a ransom. She didn't realize she was standing in the middle of a forensic audit. And I had just closed the books. "Mom?" I said. "Did you send it?" She asked, the greed leaking through her panic. "I took care of it." I lied. "But the bank needs a few minutes to process the international clearance. Sit tight." I hung up before she could ask another question. I grabbed my coat. I grabbed my keys. I walked out of my apartment, leaving the lights on. I needed to be somewhere else when the bomb went off. I reached the garage beneath my building just as the first shockwave hit. My phone didn't ring this time. It lit up with a text message, followed instantly by 3 more. They weren't the carefully crafted threats of earlier. They were raw, misspelled panic. "Dad." The card declined. "Dad." They cut it in half. They called security. "Mom. What did you do? Fix it now." I stood by the driver's side of my car, the concrete cold beneath my boots, and read the words with the clinical satisfaction of watching a demolition proceed exactly according to schedule. I could picture the scene perfectly. The humid air of the Cabo nightclub, the confident smirk on Caleb's face as he handed over the black metal card, the sudden shift in the atmosphere when the server came back not with a receipt, but with a manager. They thought they were holding a royal flush. They didn't realize I had reshuffled the deck the moment they threatened my job. I didn't call them back. I didn't want to hear their screams or their lies about how I was killing my brother. I opened the chat thread and typed one final message. I kept it brief. I kept it professional. It was the closing statement of our relationship. I just reported the identity theft to the U.S. consulate and the fraud unit. The accounts are frozen. The local authorities have been notified that an American citizen is attempting to use stolen financial instruments. You wanted the police involved? You got them. Good luck. I hit send. Then I blocked their numbers. Not just on my phone, but on the carrier level. I blocked their emails. I blocked their social media accounts. I severed the digital arteries that connected us. For the first time in a decade, the silence in my mind felt light. I got into my one luxury, an electric sedan, and drove. Not home, but to my office. The city slept while I celebrated a private victory. I had finally beaten my parents' games. Caleb would face his mess alone. And for once, their chaos was not my responsibility. But as I pulled toward my tower, I realized my mistake. I had treated them like rational opponents. Parasites don't stop when the host cuts off food, they burrow deeper. At a red light, my car suddenly died. Lights out, engine off, doors locked. Then the console lit up with a call. Primary account holder. My father had co-signed the lease, his name still controlled the car. And he used that leverage. He reported it stolen, activated remote locks, and called the police. He demanded I transfer control of the family trust or get arrested for stealing his vehicle. Sirens approached. The DocuSign form glowed on the screen. I pretended to brake, signed, and the car powered back on. They celebrated, thinking they had seized my hard-earned nest egg. Instead, they inherited my firewall. The trust was never savings, it was a holding tank for secured business debt with a poison pill clause. The moment trusteeship transferred without approval, the shield collapsed. The debt became personal. They didn't gain money, they assumed $2.5 million in liabilities. I drove away as police arrived. While they toasted in Cabo, logging into withdraw, they discovered tax liens and immediate debt service instead of funds. I headed out of Chicago, parked at a roadside diner, and ordered pancakes. I blocked every contact. For the first time, no one could reach me. No guilt, no regret, just relief. I wasn't their net or bankroll anymore. They wanted control. They got it along with the crater they dug. I ate my pancakes and breathed freely. I was just Letitia now. And I was finally free.